Imagine you are sitting at your desk right now, just looking at your current job description. Think about the specific tasks you do every single day, the software you navigate, the distinct expertise you've spent years, maybe decades building up.
Right.
Now, I want you to imagine taking a thick, permanent red marker and just crossing out almost all of it.
Oh, wow.
Because according to some truly staggering projections we are looking at today, within this decade, over 85% of workers are going to need to change jobs entirely, or at least substantially modify their daily tasks just to remain employable.
Yeah, it's a number that really forces you to pause. We've operated for generations under this comforting illusion of a linear career path.
Definitely.
The whole idea was that you learn trade or you get a degree in your 20s, and then you just kind of coast on that foundational knowledge. Maybe you get a few tune-ups along the way until retirement. But the data makes it very clear that the ground is quite literally shifting beneath our feet.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because honestly, an 85% turnover in daily tasks sounds less like a labor market trend and more like a professional apocalypse.
It does sound like that, yeah.
But the goal of today's deep dive isn't to induce panic. It's actually to build a survival guide for you. We are pulling from a really comprehensive piece of research by Dr. Jonathan H. Westover on reskilling for resilience.
It's a fantastic source.
And the core mission of our conversation today is to explore this massive radical shift that has to happen in how we think about our brains and our careers. We have to move away from what the research calls organization-centric training.
Right, which is basically a company just trying to fix its own immediate quarterly problems.
Exactly, and move toward person-centered lifelong learning, the kind of continuous adaptation that keeps you, the listener, employable and valuable no matter what happens to your specific company or your industry.
That distinction between organization-centric and person-centered is really the crux of the whole issue. And to really grasp why this is so urgent, we have to recognize that this 85% projection isn't just a story about AI coming for our jobs.
Like AI is always the villain in the headlines.
It gets all the headlines, but it's really just one ingredient in a much larger, more volatile recipe. We are looking at a convergence of several massive structural forces hitting the global labor market at the exact same time. It's this complex interplay of forces that makes the old corporate training playbook so wildly insufficient.
Right, the disruption is literally everywhere. And the research outlines these major structural fractures, 4 of them specifically, that are fundamentally breaking how we learn at work.
Yeah.
Let's look at the first one because I think almost everyone listening has felt this recently.
The shift to remote work.
Yeah, the massive shift toward remote and hybrid work. The data in the source shows that formal face-to-face training hours plummeted from 40% to just 16% in a single year.
That is a huge drop.
But the research points out that the real damage isn't the loss of the formal classroom. It's the evaporation of something called organic learning.
Organic learning is one of those crucial environmental factors that remains largely invisible until it's suddenly just gone. It represents the informal, unstructured knowledge acquisition that happens naturally when you are physically co-located with your colleagues.
I always like to think of organic learning as secondhand smoke, but for good stuff.
That's a great way to put it.
Like you just absorb all this vital, unwritten professional knowledge simply by being in the room and breathing the same air as experienced people. It's sitting at your desk and overhearing how a veteran senior manager de-escalates a tense client call.
Or the casual 5-minute mentoring session that happens when you're just waiting for the coffee machine.
Yeah.
Or that spontaneous collaboration when someone rolls their chair over to your screen to help troubleshoot a bug.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you are isolated in your home office staring at a screen, that secondhand knowledge completely vanishes. You only learn what is explicitly scheduled on a calendar invite.
Which fundamentally limits the depth of what you can acquire. And the research highlights a really concerning ripple effect here. This evaporation disproportionately harms early career workers.
Oh, because they don't have the network yet.
Precisely. If you are a new employee onboarding virtually, you are starved of that nuanced interpersonal skill development. You aren't forming those spontaneous professional networks that naturally facilitate problem solving.
Which makes sense. They're just alone in their apartments.
Over time, remote workers start reporting a deep sense of disconnection from the organizational culture. And that culture is what usually reinforces how abstract skills are actually applied on the ground.
So, remote work is isolating our youngest, newest employees. But that isolation is actually colliding with a totally different demographic crisis happening on the other end of the spectrum, which is our second major disruption.
The rapidly aging workforce.
Yes. The demographics here are undeniable. By 2030, a quarter of the U.S. workforce is going to be 55 or older. And we are seeing similar, if not even steeper, aging trends across parts of Asia and Europe.
What's fascinating here is the cognitive science behind this demographic shift. It gets really intricate. We have to look at how the human brain actually processes new information as it ages,
Right.
and why standard one-size-fits-all corporate training fails older workers so systematically. In cognitive psychology, there is a key distinction between two types of intelligence. First, you have fluid intelligence.
Okay, what does that cover?
This encompasses your raw reasoning power, your processing speed, and your working memory. Fluid intelligence actually peaks in early adulthood and then begins a slow, natural decline.
Wow, okay.
Because of that decline, it can become increasingly difficult to ingest and master genuinely novel, entirely unfamiliar information at a really rapid pace.
Which makes total sense. If a company just tosses a completely alien, complex software architecture
Right.
at a 60-year-old and expects them to process it at the exact same speed as a 25-year-old fresh out of college?
They are essentially setting that older worker up to fail.
Right. It's just biologically unfair.
They are failing because they are ignoring the second, equally crucial half of the cognitive equation, and that is crystallized intelligence.
Crystallized intelligence.
Yes. This represents a person's accumulated knowledge, their deep expertise, and their nuanced contextual understanding of their field. Unlike fluid intelligence, crystallized intelligence can continue to grow and deepen well into a person's 70s.
That's amazing.
Older workers have an extraordinary capacity to learn, but they learn most effectively when new content is deliberately anchored to their existing, heavily developed knowledge structures.
But the standard corporate onboarding module just treats everyone like a blank slate. It completely disregards the fact that a 55-year-old has decades of highly idiosyncratic, specialized mental models.
It completely ignores it.
When a company ignores that crystallized intelligence, they aren't just insulting the employee. They are leaving a massive reservoir of organizational wisdom entirely untapped. And worse, they start triggering these terrible emotional realities. The source mentions that when older workers are subjected to training that doesn't fit how they learn, their self-efficacy plummets. In real terms, that means they start internalizing the stereotype. They start believing, maybe I'm just too old to learn this, and they just stop trying.
It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of obsolescence, driven entirely by bad training design.
It's so systemic. And speaking of systemic, this brings us to the third disruption. It's not just who is working or how we are working. It's about where work is even tenable anymore. We have to look at climate change and occupational displacement.
Yes, the geographic shifts.
The source notes that over 20 million people are displaced annually by climate impacts. This is fundamentally altering the geography of labor. Agricultural work, outdoor labor, entire regional sectors are having to shift.
It's massive.
Now, looking at the labor market facts in this research, I have to challenge a very common, very sunny narrative you hear a lot. The idea of green reskilling.
Right, the idea that it will be easy.
Yeah, the assumption that as legacy industries fade, we're just going to seamlessly transition all those workers into the renewable energy sector. That seems incredibly frictionless for a world that is, full of friction.
The friction is the entire point.
Yeah.
If we look at this strictly through the lens of labor economics and the actual feasibility of skill transferability, the research explicitly warns against those overly optimistic policy narratives.
So it's not that simple.
Not at all. Let's take the classic example of transitioning a coal miner into a solar panel installer. A coal miner possesses deep, highly specialized knowledge, subterranean geology, heavy machinery operation in confined spaces, specific ventilation safety protocols.
Right.
Those specific skills do not transfer neatly or automatically to the electrical engineering, surface-level installation, and photovoltaic system requirements of solar energy.
Right. You can't just hand a miner a different wrench and say, go build a solar farm. It's a
Yeah.
completely different foundational knowledge base.
Exactly. The underlying mechanics of the jobs are disparate. If regional workforce development agencies don't map declining occupations to growth sectors realistically, meaning they base their programs on actual factual skill overlap rather than wishful thinking, these grand reskilling initiatives will stall out.
And what happens to the workers?
The result is that vulnerable workers are left stranded in declining regions without a realistic, bridgeable pathway to a new livelihood.
Which leads right into the fourth structural fracture. And this is the one that honestly blew my mind. We spend so much time analyzing corporate training, but we are completely ignoring the hidden majority. Over 61% of the global workforce operates in the informal economy.
It's an immense segment of humanity.
We are talking about gig workers, day laborers, street vendors, intergenerational artisans.
And from a developmental perspective, these workers are operating entirely without a safety net. They bear the absolute full burden of their own training and adaptation. There is no corporate HR department running analytics to identify their skill gaps. There is no employer sponsorship to pay for evening courses, and certainly no paid time off to pursue professional development.
Okay, so let's synthesize this. We have remote work destroying organic learning. We have an aging workforce being alienated by one-size-fits-all training. We have climate realities forcing structural job changes with immense friction. And we have 61% of the world figuring it out completely on their own.
That's the landscape, yes.
Given these disruptions, what is the actual human cost of ignoring this? Because it seems like the default corporate response is to just buy a company-wide subscription to an online learning platform, hand everyone an iPad and say, good luck, go reskill. Why doesn't that work?
Because it completely ignores the psychological toll of the modern labor market. The cost of failing to adapt isn't just financial. Psychologists refer to it as a loss of work volition.
Work volition. So volition implies will or choice. Are you saying the cost here is that people actually lose the psychological feeling that they have any control or agency over their own career trajectory?
That is the exact mechanism. When your skills stagnate in a market that is rapidly evolving around you, you lose your agency. You face underemployment, you get locked into declining roles with deteriorating wages, and you lose the perception that you are a relevant participant in the economy.
That sounds awful.
It's the feeling of being functionally trapped.
Which sounds exhausting.
It is deeply exhausting, and it creates a vicious downward spiral. The research shows that when workers lose that sense of work volition, it severely elevates their risk for anxiety, depression, and general disengagement.
So they just give up.
Yes. As their mental health declines, they become even less proactive in seeking out new development. So the very people who most desperately need to renew their skills are the ones who engage with learning the least, simply because they feel entirely defeated by the system.
Which brings me back to the iPad solution. We have all this incredible access to personalized AI learning and micro courses now. It seems like democratizing the information should be the fix.
You would think so.
But the data in the source material drops a heavy reality check. MOOCs, these massive open online courses that provide free access to world-class university content, have an average completion rate of under 10%.
Under 10%. Because simply providing access to raw content is fundamentally not the same thing as facilitating human learning.
It makes me think of a medical scenario. It's like taking a random employee, dropping them into an operating room with a scalpel and an iPad, loaded with world-class surgical tutorials, and saying, good luck, the patient needs a bypass.
Yes, exactly.
The access to the tutorial isn't the problem. The problem is they have absolutely no guided scaffolding to process, practice, and apply that deeply complex information. They don't know how to learn it.
That is where the psychological concept of metacognition becomes the central hurdle. Metacognition is, quite simply, thinking about your own thinking. It's the ability to accurately assess your own learning needs, objectively identify your own skill gaps, and then self-regulate your behavior to close those gaps. And the harsh truth of adult learning is that we struggle deeply with this.
Why is that?
The research specifically cites the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is the cognitive bias where people frequently overestimate their abilities or fail entirely to recognize their own incompetence until a massive, undeniable performance failure occurs.
We literally do not know what we do not know. But wait, this presents a huge paradox.
Oh, it does.
If we know that adults are terrible at assessing their own skills because of the Dunning-Kruger effect, how on earth are we supposed to figure out what to learn?
Right?
The source talks about using a lifelong learning matrix to map out our competencies. But isn't asking a worker with the Dunning-Kruger effect to fill out their own matrix kind of like asking a blindfolded person to draw a map?
It is a phenomenal paradox, and overcoming it is why the lifelong learning matrix cannot just be a solo exercise done in a vacuum. To bypass the Dunning-Kruger trap, the matrix requires external friction.
External friction? Like what?
You don't just guess what you're good at. You have to map your assumed competencies against objective industry benchmarks, peer evaluations, or tangible outcomes. You have to actively seek out brutal, honest feedback from mentors, or use standardized assessments to validate your self-perception.
So you have to test your assumptions in the real world.
Exactly. Once you establish a realistic baseline, then the matrix becomes a powerful tool. You start mapping available developmental opportunities, whether that is a formal course, a shadowing opportunity, or a specific project, directly against those validated gaps.
It forces you to build an actual strategy. You aren't just endlessly scrolling through a corporate learning portal looking for a fun video. You are actively engineering a feedback loop and mapping your own survival plan.
It teaches the actual mechanics of goal setting and self-regulation, because moving to person-centered learning requires the worker to deeply understand their own cognitive machinery.
Okay, I want to take this out of the digital realm entirely.
Sure.
If self-guided online courses aren't the magic bullet, how do people actually acquire deep, usable, complex skills out there in the real world?
They craft them.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The research gets incredibly practical with the concept of job crafting. Give me the mechanics of this. How does a regular person just change their job description to learn new things without getting fired?
Job crafting is a brilliant mechanism for experiential, on-the-ground learning. It is the deliberate process where employees proactively modify the boundaries of their own role.
Like taking on extra work.
Sometimes they might engage in task crafting, taking on new responsibilities that stretch their abilities, or relational crafting, deliberately building alliances with experts in different departments, or even cognitive crafting, redefining the purpose of their daily work.
Okay, I see.
You aren't waiting for HR to hand you a formal promotion or a new job title. You are stealthily molding your current job into a personal learning laboratory.
The source material provides a fascinating factual example of this, playing out at a mid-sized auto parts manufacturer. They were facing a massive wave of automation.
Which usually means layoffs.
Normally, that translates to wholesale layoffs for the floor production workers.
Mm.
But instead, they engineered a rotational apprenticeship model based on job crafting. They invited the production workers to apply for 6-month assignments, where they would rotate through maintenance, quality assurance, and even basic coding roles.
It's a perfect synthesis. The workers received some formal classroom instruction, but critically, it was married to hands-on relational crafting with technical specialists on the floor.
Right?
After the rotation, these workers had bridged the gap and could transition into the new, higher-level technical positions. The company avoided the friction of layoffs and solved their technical talent shortage. And the workers utilized experiential learning to craft entirely new, resilient career trajectories.
The research contrasts that with Deloitte's approach. Deloitte has built this massive corporate culture around person-centered learning, utilizing their management layer totally differently.
Yes, Deloitte operates with the structural philosophy that continuous learning must be normative. They provide employees with literal learning budgets that can be spent on exploring topics outside their immediate purview.
That's incredible.
But the most crucial mechanism is how they deploy their managers. Managers at Deloitte are explicitly trained to act as learning coaches.
So not just taskmasters.
Exactly. Their regular one-on-one conversations aren't just backward-looking performance evaluations focused on KPIs. They are forward-looking developmental conversations, mapping the employee's long-term aspirations against the firm's evolving needs.
Okay, but let's pause here and bring this back to the listener. What if you're listening to this right now and your manager is definitely not a learning coach?
That is the reality for a lot of people.
What if your boss actively discourages you from spending time on anything outside your immediate daily metrics? How do you job craft when the environment is hostile to it?
That is a very real constraint. When your direct manager is a blocker, job crafting has to become more subversive and horizontal.
Subversive, I like that.
You focus heavily on relational crafting,
Yeah.
building alliances with peers or leaders in other departments who do value development. You volunteer for cross-functional projects where your immediate boss isn't the sole gatekeeper.
You find the loopholes.
You find ways to optimize your required tasks so efficiently that you carve out hidden pockets of time to shadow others. It requires a tremendous amount of self-advocacy to build your own curriculum when the organization won't provide the syllabus.
Which brings us back to that 61% of the workforce in the informal economy. Or think about immigrants who arrive in a new country with incredible, complex skills, but zero recognized credentials.
Right.
They don't even have a hostile boss to work around. They have no organizational structure at all. How do we help them job craft and prove their worth?
This requires systemic intervention, specifically through systems called recognition of prior learning, or RPL. The reality is that informal occupations require highly sophisticated, crystallized intelligence.
like the artisans you mentioned earlier.
Think of the extraordinary manual dexterity, material knowledge, and spatial reasoning a traditional weaver or an informal auto mechanic acquires over decades. RPL systems are designed to assess and formalize those exact hidden competencies against official occupational standards, regardless of whether they were learned in a classroom or an alleyway.
So how does that actually work mechanically? Like, how do they test them?
The research highlights India's use of practical trade tests as a prime example. Artisans, gig workers, and repair technicians can undergo hands-on practical assessments where they physically demonstrate their skills under observation by certified evaluators.
Oh, so they just show what they can do.
If they pass the benchmark, they receive an official, government-recognized skill certificate. It completely bypasses the need for formal schooling. This is an absolute game changer for economic equity. It allows a worker to take their invisible, informal talent and convert it into a tangible, recognized credential. That piece of paper can secure a microloan to expand their business or act as a passport into the formal economy.
It's literally making the invisible visible.
Yeah.
I love that. So we've explored the micro-level individual tactics like job crafting and mid-level company tactics like management coaching.
Yes.
But if we are genuinely going to survive this 85% job turnover rate globally, it feels like we need a massive foundational shift in our collective mindset and honestly, a society-wide infrastructure upgrade.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, surviving this level of volatility requires cultivating two specific psychological traits at scale: learning agility and a growth mindset.
Okay, learning agility.
Learning agility is the specific capability to learn from an experience, extract the underlying principle, and then successfully apply that insight to a completely novel, highly ambiguous situation.
Got it. And the growth mindset.
The growth mindset is the fundamental psychological belief that your basic abilities are malleable, that they can be developed through dedication and effort, rather than being fixed traits you are simply born with and stuck with forever.
The research uses AT&T's Workforce 2020 initiative to show what happens when you try to install that mindset across a massive enterprise. AT&T realized years ago that shifting technology was going to render a huge portion of their legacy workforce obsolete.
Yes, a daunting realization.
But instead of the traditional organization-centric route, which is just mass layoffs followed by trying to hire new people, they publicly committed to retraining over 100,000 existing employees.
And the mechanism they used to achieve that was radical transparency. They built an internal platform showing exactly what specific skills would be required for the future positions they were creating, where the current organizational gaps were, and precisely what the learning pathways looked like to get there.
So everyone knew exactly what was happening.
They framed the transition as a transparent partnership. The company provides the financial resources, the tools, and the time, but the employee is entirely responsible for taking ownership of their own development. By framing this as a collective structural challenge rather than an individual deficit, AT&T successfully embedded that growth mindset.
But again, that's one massive, highly profitable company. A 21st century economy cannot rely entirely on corporate benevolence to keep its citizens employable. We desperately need 21st century public learning infrastructure.
Precisely. The societal infrastructure is the final piece of the puzzle. Just as the industrial demands of the 20th century required the invention of universal secondary education, the volatility of the 21st century requires universal access to continuous learning.
It has to be a public good.
The research points to international models that are already operationalizing this. Look at Singapore's Skills Future initiative.
I found this part fascinating. Walk us through how Skills Future changes the game for the average citizen.
It treats the citizen as an empowered consumer of education. The government provides all citizens with individual learning accounts populated with specific learning credits.
So they literally give them money to learn.
Citizens can use these credits across a massive curated marketplace of approved training providers, ranging from universities to specific technical boot camps. The government actively tops up these accounts at various life stages, heavily subsidizing and structurally encouraging continuous skill upgrading throughout a person's entire life.
That's a completely different paradigm.
We also see models like Germany's dual apprenticeship system, which deeply integrates paid, on-the-job workplace training with formal, state-sponsored classroom instruction. It creates highly respected, adaptable vocational pathways.
It's treating learning as a fundamental public utility, exactly like roads or the electrical grid. We need portable credentials that you carry with you from job to job.
Mm.
And we need the kind of income support that allows a person to actually take 3 months off to reskill without facing immediate financial ruin.
Because the research is unequivocal on this point. When large segments of the population lack realistic, supported pathways to maintain their employability, economic inequality drastically widens, social mobility halts, and the entire civic system becomes incredibly fragile.
It threatens everything.
Equitable access to continuous learning is not just a progressive HR policy. It is the bedrock of societal resilience.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? If we synthesize everything we've explored from Dr. Westover's research, the takeaway is stark, but I think it's deeply empowering.
I agree.
The future of work demands that we completely stop treating training as an episodic, temporary corporate Band-Aid applied only when a company is bleeding. We have to start treating learning as an embedded, lifelong, person-centered habit.
Continuous adaptation.
While governments and massive organizations absolutely need to step up and build the macro infrastructure, your own work volition, your agency, your freedom to choose your path ultimately depends heavily on you. It depends on your willingness to seek out brutal feedback, avoid the Dunning-Kruger trap, and continuously craft your own job, even when it's uncomfortable.
It requires adopting an aggressively active stance toward your own capability. In this labor market, you simply cannot wait to be trained.
We started this deep dive by imagining the ground shifting beneath your feet, realizing that 85% of your daily tasks might be totally obsolete within a few years. That is a terrifying statistic if you are standing still.
But you don't have to stand still.
Exactly. If you are already moving, if you are actively mapping your matrix and continuously learning, it's not an apocalypse at all. It's just a new landscape.
And that brings us to a final, vital question to consider as you navigate that shifting landscape. In a world where specialized, highly technical skills can become obsolete almost overnight due to AI or shifting global markets, what is the one deeply human, highly transferable meta skill you possess that absolutely cannot be automated? And more importantly, what specific steps are you taking today to proactively craft your job around it?